Free my daddy, and I'll make you walk again. The courtroom didn't go quiet. It exploded. Laughter. Loud, ugly, dismissive laughter that bounced off the wooden walls and high ceilings, like something that belonged anywhere but here. A prosecutor covered his mouth. A bailiff looked away. Someone in the gallery actually clapped once, like this was entertainment they hadn't paid for, but were grateful to receive. Elijah Carter stood in the center of that laughter and did not move. He was 9 years old. He was wearing his church clothes, the only clothes his aunt said were respectful enough for court. His collar was slightly too tight. His shoes were slightly too big, and his right arm was extended. One small finger pointed directly at the man behind the bench, Judge Raymond Cole, a man who hadn't stood on his own 2 feet in 3 years. Judge Cole did not laugh. He stared at the boy the way a man stares at something he doesn't understand, but instinctively knows he should not dismiss. His expression was unreadable, carved from years of delivering verdicts that broke people and calling it justice. "Young man," his voice cut through the laughter like a blade through cloth. The room went silent instantly. "Do you understand where you are?" "Yes, sir." Elijah's voice didn't shake. "I'm in the place that's about to make a mistake it can't take back." More murmuring. The prosecutor, a broad-shouldered man named Gerald Pitts, who wore his confidence like an expensive cologne, leaned toward his table and whispered something to his associate. They both smiled. From the defendant's table, Marcus Carter twisted in his seat, handcuffs pulling against his wrists, his eyes wide and wet and terrified, not of the court, but of his son, Elijah. Marcus's voice was barely a sound. "Baby, sit down. Please." Elijah turned and looked at his father. Really looked at him, but the orange jumpsuit that still didn't look right on the man who smelled like engine oil and always had a joke ready. At the dark circles under his eyes from months in a cell. At the way Marcus Carter, the man who had never once let Elijah see him cry, was blinking too fast. Elijah turned back to the judge. "No, Daddy, not this time." The bailiff was already moving, a large hand reaching toward Elijah's shoulder. Judge Cole raised one finger, and the bailiff froze mid-step. "Let him speak." Cole's eyes hadn't left the boy. "You have 60 seconds, son. Use them." The prosecutor shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is a sentencing hearing, not a school play. This child has no legal standing to—" 58 seconds, Mr. Pitts. "Sit down, or I'll give in your time too." Pitts sat. Elijah reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. The entire room leaned forward without realizing it. Prosecutors, reporters, gallery strangers, the bailiff with his hand still frozen halfway to his shoulder. What could a 9-year-old boy possibly pull from his pocket in a federal courtroom that would mean anything to anyone? It wasn't a document, it wasn't a phone, it wasn't evidence in any form a lawyer would recognize. It was a drawing. A single folded piece of paper, worn along the creases from being opened and closed 100 times. Elijah unfolded it carefully, the way someone handles something that cost them everything, and held it up so the judge could see. It was a child's drawing, crayon and pencil, of a large building at night. Stick-figure trucks in the lot, a stick-figure man running toward the building, flames drawn in orange and red, erupting from a rooftop corner. And in the parking lot, partially hidden behind a truck, a small stick-figure boy watching everything. "This is what I saw," Elijah said. "The night they say my daddy killed those men." The laughter was completely gone now. Judge Cole's eyes moved from the drawing to the boy, and back again. Something shifted in his face. Not softness exactly, but a crack in the stone, a hairline fracture. "Your Honor, a child's crayon drawing cannot be entered as—" "Nobody asked you, Mr. Pitts." Cole's voice was so flat and so final that the prosecutor physically leaned back in his chair. The judge looked at Elijah. "Where were you that night, son?" "In my daddy's car." In the warehouse parking lot. I hid in the back seat to surprise him after his late shift. Elijah's voice was steady, each word placed like he had rehearsed this 1,000 times, because he had. I saw Mr. Voss go into the building. I saw him come back out and leave really fast. Then my daddy came out of the side office, and I was about to knock on the window, and then everything exploded. He paused. My daddy ran back toward the fire, not away from it, toward it. He was trying to get people out. That's not what somebody who started a fire does. The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear the flag near the jury box shifting from the vent. The guy's Carter had stopped blinking. Marcus Carter had stopped blinking. He was just staring at his son, one tear running straight down the side of his face, catching the courtroom light on its way down. Defense attorney Diane Lane, underfunded, underslept, working this case on a payment plan she knew would never be completed, slowly sat up straight for the first time in 3 weeks. Son. Judge Cole leaned forward slightly. You mentioned a gas station, Elijah nodded. Across the street from the warehouse. It has cameras that face the parking lot. I checked on Google Maps. The angle covers the warehouse entrance. Nobody ever looked at it. Nobody ever asked. Gerald Pitts' confidence cologne had stopped working. He was very still. Cole looked at Diane Lane. Counselor, were the gas station surveillance records ever subpoenaed? Lane stood slowly. No, Your Honor. Multiple requests were denied at the investigation level. The case was deemed closed before discovery could be extended. Denied by whom? By the lead investigator, a Detective Carl Rains. Something moved behind Judge Cole's eyes. Not surprise, something older than surprise. Something that looked almost like recognition. He straightened in his wheelchair. His knuckles rested on the armrests. For a long moment he looked at the drawing still in Elijah's hand, at the small stick figure of a child watching a world catch fire from the back seat of his father's car. This court enters recess. His voice was quiet now, dangerously quiet. I want gas station surveillance records from the night in question on my desk within the hour. I want Detective Carl Rains located and available for questioning. And I want nobody, he looked directly at the prosecution table, nobody leaving this building. He turned back to Elijah one last time. Son, sit with your father's attorney. Elijah nodded. He started to walk toward the defense table, then stopped. He looked back at the judge. You're going to do the right thing, he said. Not a question, not a plea, a statement of fact from someone who had already decided to believe it. And when you do, you'll walk again. I know it. He sat down. And somewhere across the city, a man in a dark suit stepped out of the courthouse side entrance, pressed his phone to his ear, and said 5 words in a voice stripped of everything except urgency. The boy knows too much. The recess lasted 43 minutes. Nobody left, not the reporters, not the gallery strangers who had come expecting a routine sentencing and gotten something they couldn't name yet. Not Gerald Pitts, who sat at the prosecution table with his jacket still buttoned and his eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the defense table, like he was doing math in his head, not liking the answers. Elijah sat beside Diane Lane and didn't touch the glass of water someone had placed in front of him. He kept his drawing folded in both hands on the table, thumbs pressed flat against the crease. Marcus watched his son from across the room and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. When Judge Cole returned, he didn't announce himself. The door simply opened, and he wheeled to the bench with the same economy of movement he brought to everything. No wasted motion, no performance. He set a single folder on the bench in front of him and looked up. The gas station surveillance request has been submitted. We are waiting on confirmation. His eyes moved to Elijah. In the meantime, I have questions. Pitts rose halfway. Your Honor, Any questioning of a minor without a guardian present would be procedurally. His father is present, counselor. Sit down. Pitts sat down. Cole looked at Elijah. You said you were in the parking lot that night. In your father's car? Yes, sir. How did you get there? I took the bus. Daddy didn't know. I wanted to surprise him because it was the anniversary of when he got the job. He always said that job changed our lives. A pause. I brought him a sandwich. Something in the gallery shifted. Not laughter this time. Something quieter and harder to name. What time did you arrive? A little after 11. His shift ended at midnight. And you stayed in the car the entire time? Yes, sir. I fell asleep for a little while. Then a car door slamming woke me up. Whose car? Elijah's jaw tightened slightly. Mr. Voss. I recognized his car. Black, really clean. He parked it in the spot that said reserved, near the main entrance. I'd seen it before, when Daddy took me to the company picnic. Cole made a note. What did you see him do? He went inside through the main door. He had keys. He wasn't rushing or anything. He looked normal. He was inside for maybe 15 minutes. Then he came back out fast. Not running, but fast. Got in his car and left. Then the sound started. Nobody in that courtroom moved. My daddy came out the side door. He was coughing. He looked around the parking lot, and then he looked at the building, and then he went back inside. Elijah stopped. He went back inside. The silence pressed down on everything. The firefighters came, and they brought him out, and he was okay. But two men didn't come out, and they said it was his fault. His voice was completely even. That was somehow the most devastating part. Not that it cracked, but that it didn't. My daddy went back in to help people. That's not what someone who started a fire does. Diane Lane put her pen down. Pitts cleared his throat. Your Honor, the testimony of a child who was hiding in a car at 11 at night is hardly Mr. Pitts. Cole didn't look at him. You have your turn. He looked back at Elijah. You mentioned the gas station to me before recess. You checked the camera angle yourself. On Google Maps, you can see the street view. The camera on the corner of the gas station faces the warehouse entrance. If it was recording that night, it would show Mr. Voss going in and coming out. And it would show my daddy going back in. He paused. Nobody ever asked about it. Cole looked at Diane Lane. Counselor, in your discovery requests, was a gas station subpoena ever filed? Lane stood. 3 times, Your Honor. All 3 were returned denied by the lead investigator on grounds that the evidence scope had been defined and closed. The lead investigator being Detective Carl Rains. Yes, Your Honor. The name landed in the room differently than it had the first time. Cole let it sit there. Your Honor, Pitts stood with the measured energy of a man trying to project calm, while something behind his eyes ran very fast. Detective Rains conducted a thorough and documented investigation. The digital evidence, the safety logs, the override records, the access codes, all point exclusively to the defendant. A child's recollection of shadows and car doors in a dark parking lot cannot reasonably be placed above. The child, Cole said quietly, identified the make, color, and reserved parking designation of Harlan Voss's vehicle. He identified the entry point Voss used, estimated the duration of his presence, and described the sequence of events in a manner consistent with the fire marshal's own timeline, a timeline your office used to prosecute this case. He let that sit. Explain to me why none of that appears anywhere in Detective Rains's report. Pitts opened his mouth, closed it. Because it wasn't in the report, Cole said. Because nobody asked Elijah Carter what he saw. Or because somebody decided not to write down what they found. The gallery was absolutely still. A clerk appeared at the side door and crossed to the bench, sliding a folded note to Cole without a word. Cole read it. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A small, almost invisible hardening, like water cooling toward ice. He set the note face down on the bench. The gas station, he said evenly, has confirmed that their exterior cameras were operational on the night in question. The footage exists. A pause. However, when the retrieval team arrived, they found that approximately 90 seconds of footage, specifically the window covering the period between 11:40 and 12:10, has been corrupted. The defense table went cold. Diane Lane looked at Elijah. Elijah looked at his father. Marcus looked at the floor. Pitts exhaled, barely audible, just a quiet release of pressure, and smoothed the front of his jacket. 90 seconds. The exact 90 seconds that would have confirmed everything. Cole looked at the note again. Then he looked at Pitts. Then he looked at Detective Raines's name, written in the margin of the folder in front of him. A name he had written there himself, 20 minutes into recess, because he had seen it somewhere before. A long time ago, in a different file. A file he hadn't thought about in 3 years, because thinking about it required remembering the night a car ran him off a rain-slicked overpass and into a concrete barrier, and nobody was ever charged. He didn't say any of that, not yet. This court will obtain the original storage device from the gas station and submit it for independent forensic recovery. His voice gave nothing away. If that footage can be restored, it will be. If it cannot, we will determine when the corruption occurred and how. He closed the folder. Detective Carl Raines will appear before this court tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. That is not a request. He turned to the bailiff. Take the defendant back to holding. This hearing is suspended until tomorrow. He looked at Marcus directly for the first time. Mr. Carter, your son is a remarkable young man. Marcus couldn't speak. He nodded once. Cole's gaze moved back to Elijah, lingered for just a moment. Then he turned his wheelchair toward the chamber door. He stopped just before he reached it. Without turning around, quietly enough that only the first 2 rows could hear, he said, "Find out who had access to that gas station footage before my team arrived." Then the door closed behind him. Diane Lane was already on her phone, moving fast. Elijah sat still, the drawing back in his hands, watching the door his father had just been walked through. The sandwich he brought that night, the one that was still in the car. When the fire trucks arrived, he'd thought about it every day since. He hadn't told the court that part. He hadn't told them that when the police took his statement the night of the fire, a man in plain clothes, not a uniform, plain clothes, had leaned down to his eye level in the parking lot and said, very gently, very clearly, "You didn't see anything tonight, did you, son?" He had been 8 years old. He had said no. He wasn't 8 anymore. Detective Carl Raines arrived at 9:02. He was the kind of man who looked trustworthy by design. Steady handshake, pressed collar, the particular brand of calm that came either from innocence or from years of practice performing it. He took the witness stand without being asked twice, and folded his hands on the rail like a man with nothing to hide. Cole studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Detective Raines, you were the lead investigator on the Marcus Carter case." "That's correct, Your Honor." "Walk me through your process for defining the evidence scope." Raines did. He was good at it, organized, methodical, using the kind of language that sounded thorough without actually being specific. Digital access logs, override sequences, timestamp correlation. He made the case sound airtight in 11 sentences. Cole let him finish. "Did you interview all witnesses present at or near the warehouse on the night in question?" "All witnesses who were identified and available, yes." "Were you aware of any unidentified individuals in the parking lot that night?" A beat. "Small, almost invisible." "No, Your Honor. There was a 9-year-old boy in the back seat of the defendant's car, parked in the north lot." "Were you aware of that?" Raines's expression didn't move. "No, the boy was present when first responders arrived. He gave a statement to an officer on scene." Cole opened a folder in front of him. Statement reference 742, logged at 1:06 in the morning, taken by an Officer Daly. He looked up. "Did you review Officer Daly's statements before closing the evidence scope?" "I reviewed all documents forwarded to me by the department." "Was statement 742 among them?" The pause this time was longer. "I would have to check my records." "I already checked." Cole's voice stayed level. It wasn't in your file. It also wasn't in the prosecutor's disclosure package. He let that land. A witness statement taken at the scene the same night, logged in the department system, never made it into your investigation. Rains said nothing. Detective, how does a logged witness statement disappear between the department system and the lead investigator's file? I can't speak to administrative gaps, Your Honor. Documents get misfiled, systems have errors. Systems have errors, Cole repeated, not mocking, just holding the words up to the light. Diane Lane rose. Your Honor, we'd like to submit a request for the full communications log between Detective Rains and the prosecution office during the investigation period. Pitts was on his feet instantly. Objection. Prosecutorial communications are protected under overruled. Cole didn't look at him. The request is granted. I want those records by end of day. He looked back at Rains. Detective, you're not dismissed. You'll remain available for further questioning. Rains stepped down from the stand with the same composed expression he'd carried up, but his hands, when he unfolded them from the rail, were not quite as steady as before. Elijah watched him from beside Diane Lane and said nothing. He had been watching Rains since the man walked through the door. There was something about the way Rains had leaned down to him in that parking lot 3 years ago, the gentleness of it, the practiced gentleness that Elijah had never forgotten. He hadn't said anything to Lane about it yet. He was waiting. He didn't know what he was waiting for exactly. But he had learned in the past 24 hours that some information was more powerful when it arrived at the right moment than when it arrived first. Cole called a 90-minute recess. He went to his chambers and closed the door, and for a long time, he sat in front of the window that looked out onto the street below. 3 years ago, he had been investigating a fraud case. A significant one. Inflated municipal contracts. Money redirected through a shell company. Public funds absorbed into a private network that had no name anyone could find. He had been 2 weeks from filing a formal referral to the federal level when his car went off the overpass. The investigation was reassigned during his recovery. The new investigator found nothing. The case was closed. The company at the center of it was called Voss Industrial. He picked up his phone and made a call he had been turning over in his mind since the previous afternoon. The man who answered had been Cole's law school roommate and was now a federal prosecutor in the district office, someone outside the city's chain entirely. And I need you to do it quietly. Raymond, that's a significant. I know what it is. Pull it. He hung up. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had changed in the way that courtroom atmospheres change when the people inside them had been making phone calls during the break, everyone slightly more guarded, slightly more alert, like the room itself had drawn a breath and not yet let it out. Cole looked at Diane Lane. Counselor, you indicated yesterday that 3 subpoena requests for gas station surveillance were denied at the investigation level. I want the denial documentation entered into the record. Lane stood. Already prepared, Your Honor. She handed the documents to the clerk. Pitts looked at his associate. His associate looked at his phone. Additionally, Lane said, we've obtained testimony from the gas station's owner, confirming that the storage unit for their exterior camera system was accessed by an individual presenting police credentials on the morning following the incident, before my team or any court representative made contact. The room shifted. That individual, Lane continued, signed the access log. She paused. The name on the log is Carl Rains. Rains was seated in the gallery. He didn't move. He didn't look up. He just became very still, in the way that people become still when they realize the architecture of something they built is making sounds it shouldn't make. Pitts stood. Your Honor, even if Detective Rains accessed the storage unit in the course of his investigation, that doesn't constitute. He accessed it the morning after the fire, Cole said, before the case had been formally opened. Before a warrant existed. Before Marcus Carter had even been named a suspect. He looked at Rains directly, for the first time since the man had stepped down from the stand. Detective, would you like to revise any part of your earlier testimony? Rains looked up. For just a moment, a single, unguarded moment, something moved across his face that wasn't calm and wasn't practiced. Then it was gone. "I'd like to speak with an attorney," he said. The gallery erupted. Cole's gavel came down twice, sharp and immediate. Order returned, but it was a different kind of order than before, the kind that sits on top of something that had already cracked open underneath. "Detective Rains will be held for formal questioning." Cole turned to the bailiff. "I also want Harlan Voss served notice that his presence will be required in this court." He paused. "Today." Across the room, Gerald Pitts was very carefully not looking at his phone, even though it had vibrated 3 times in the last 4 minutes. Elijah looked at his father through the glass partition that separated the gallery from the defendant's area. Marcus was watching the bailiff approach Rains. His expression was difficult to read, not relief, not quite, because relief required certainty, and certainty wasn't here yet. It was something closer to the feeling of a door opening in a room you'd been locked in so long you'd stopped believing the door was real. Diane Lane leaned close to Elijah and said, very quietly, "There's something else, isn't there?" It wasn't a question. Elijah looked at her. Then he looked at Judge Cole, who was speaking in low terms with his clerk, his back partially turned to the room. "The night of the fire," Elijah said, just as quietly, "when the police were there, a man came and talked to me. He wasn't in uniform. He told me I didn't see anything." He paused. He said it nicely. Lane's pen stopped moving. "I just recognized his voice," Elijah said, "when he was on the stand." Lane looked at Rains, now being escorted toward the side door, and then looked back at Elijah with an expression that was trying very hard to stay professional and not entirely succeeding. "Why didn't you say that earlier?" Elijah watched Rains disappear through the door. "Because I wanted to make sure," he said. "I'm sure now." Lane was already standing. "Your Honor, I need to approach." Cole turned. "We have additional testimony," Lane said. "From the same witness." She glanced at Elijah, regarding a conversation that took place at the scene on the night of the incident, with Detective Rains. The courtroom went very quiet. Cole looked at Elijah across the room. The boy met his gaze without flinching, the folded drawing still in his hands, his church shoes still slightly too big. The judge looked at the door Rains had just been walked through. Then he reached for his gavel. Before he could bring it down, his clerk reappeared at the side entrance, moving faster than clerks usually moved, and crossed directly to the bench. She leaned close and said something in Cole's ear that made him go completely still. He set the gavel down without striking it. "We have a problem," he said quietly. To no one in particular, to everyone. Harlan Voss did not look like a man who caused harm. That was the first thing people always said about him. He was 61, silver-haired, the kind of tanned that came from actual boats and not tanning beds. He wore a charcoal suit that had been fitted for his exact body, and he walked into the courtroom with the particular ease of a man who had spent decades in rooms where other people were nervous and he was not. He took his seat beside his attorney without being directed to it, adjusted his cuffs, and looked at Judge Cole with an expression of cooperative concern, the face of a man who had nothing to conceal and was mildly troubled that anyone might think otherwise. Cole let him sit with that expression for a moment. "Mr. Voss, thank you for coming on short notice." "Of course, Your Honor. I want to help in any way I can." "Good." Cole opened the folder in front of him. 3 years ago, your company was under preliminary investigation for inflated municipal contracts. The investigation was closed after the lead judge suffered an injury and the case was reassigned. Were you aware of that investigation? Voss's attorney leaned toward him. Voss waved a small hand. "I was aware that our contracts had been reviewed, yes. We cooperated fully. The review found nothing irregular." "The review found nothing," Cole said, "because the investigator, assigned after the original judge was removed, concluded his inquiry in 11 days. A case of that complexity closed in 11 days. He looked up, Do you know the name of that original judge, Mr. Voss? Voss looked at Cole carefully for the first time. Something moved behind his cooperative expression. Not panic, not yet. Calculation. I don't recall, he said. I do, Cole said. It was me. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Voss's attorney put his hand on his client's arm. Voss didn't move. On the night Marcus Carter's warehouse caught fire, Cole continued. Your vehicle, a black sedan, registered to Voss Industrial, was captured entering the facility parking lot at 11:47. This was confirmed by partial footage recovered from the gas station across the street. He paused. The 90 seconds that were corrupted covered the time of your exit, but the entry is intact. Voss said nothing. The digital safety override that your prosecution used to build this case against Marcus Carter was executed from a terminal inside the facility. The access code used belonged to Marcus. However, the forensic recovery team that we commissioned overnight found something your investigator's original report omitted. Cole turned a page. The terminal had been accessed using a secondary administrative login, a master override code that exists above the standard employee access level. Marcus Carter did not have that clearance. It is issued exclusively to ownership and executive management. Pitts was on his feet. Your Honor, the forensic process used by the defense cannot be authenticated without. It was commissioned by this court, Mr. Pitts. Sit down. Pitts sat. Slowly this time. Cole looked at Voss. The master override code used that night was registered to your personal executive profile, Mr. Voss. The cooperative concern on Harlan Voss's face, the cooperative concern on Harlan Voss's force, was recognizable. The expression of a man watching the ground he built his life on develop cracks. Voss shook his head once, sharply. I want to be clear about what this court now has, Cole said, not raising his voice. Footage placing you at the facility that night, a master override code traced to your executive profile, a lead investigator who accessed the only external recording device the morning after the incident, before a warrant existed, and who is now requested legal counsel. A witness statement from a child at the scene that was logged, then removed from the investigation file. And the pattern, Mr. Voss, of individuals who raised questions about your company's practices, finding themselves facing criminal charges within months of doing so. He closed the folder. 3 workers in the past 4 years, all convicted. All are now being reviewed. A sound moved through the gallery, not quite a gasp, more like a collective intake of something that hadn't been breathed in a long time. Marcus Carter sat at the defendant's table with his hands flat on the surface, completely still, like a man who had stopped trusting his own perception of reality and was waiting for something solid. Elijah watched Voss and did not look away. He had spent a year after the fire dreaming about this moment, not in the way children dream about heroic things, but in the way children dream about the specific image that won't leave them alone. Voss walking out of that building. The unhurried pace of a man who had already decided how everything would end. The car pulling out of the reserve spot. He had drawn it 100 times. Pitts stood again, and this time there was something different in his posture, a rigidity that hadn't been there before, like a man holding himself together by concentrating very hard on the act of standing upright. Your Honor, the prosecution requests a continuance to review the new forensic submissions. Due process, Cole said quietly, also required that a logged witness statement reached the lead investigator's file. It didn't. He looked at Pitts with an expression that had been building for 2 days and was now fully assembled. Mr. Pitts, the communications log between your office and Detective Rains was submitted this morning. I've reviewed it. A pause. You received a summary of Officer Daly's scene statements, including the child's account, 4 days into the investigation. The color left Gerald Pitts's face. You knew, Cole said. Just that. 2 words, and he let them stand there. Pitts opened his mouth. What came out was not words, just the beginning of a sound that stopped before it became anything. His associate was already gathering documents with the particular urgency of someone preparing to leave a building. Mr. Pitts will also be making himself available for formal inquiry. Cole looked at the federal prosecutor seated in the gallery, the man he had called from his chambers during recess the day before, who had flown in that morning with a team and 3 filing boxes. The federal office has been briefed on the full scope of what this court has uncovered. They will be taking point on the broader investigation into Voss Industrial's activities, including the municipal contract irregularities and the pattern of prosecutorial interference. Voss's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client invokes..." "Your client," Cole said, "is not being asked the question right now." He turned to face the room, fully. His hands rested on the wheels of his chair, but he wasn't moving. He was extraordinarily still, in the way that a room goes still just before something changes inside it permanently. "Marcus Carter." His voice was different now. Not softer, exactly, but something had opened in it. "The charges against you are formally dismissed. Every charge, effective immediately." A sound came from somewhere in the gallery. One person, then 2, then a wave of something that wasn't quite applause and wasn't quite crying, but was somewhere between the two. Marcus put his face in his hands. The bailiff appeared with a key. The handcuffs came off. Marcus sat there for a moment with his wrists free, looking at his own hands like he was relearning them. Then he looked up, across the room, at his son. Elijah was already on his feet. He didn't run. He walked. Steady, deliberate. The same way he had walked to the center of the courtroom 2 days ago, when everyone was laughing. He crossed the floor, and his father stood, and they met somewhere in the middle of the room that wasn't assigned to anyone, that didn't belong to the prosecution or the defense or the bench. There was just space, and Marcus Carter wrapped his arms around his son and held on. Cole watched this. He had delivered hundreds of verdicts. He had seen relief before, seen vindication before, seen families reconnect across the bar of a courtroom before. He had learned, somewhere in the middle of his career, to observe these moments from a professional distance, to be moved without being undone by them. He was not maintaining that distance right now. He looked down at his hands on the wheels of his chair. He thought about the overpass. He thought about the 11 days it took a reassigned investigator to close a case he had spent 8 months building. He thought about every morning in the past 3 years when he had wheeled himself to the bench and told himself that the chair was a physical fact and not a surrender. He thought about a 9-year-old boy who had stood in the center of this room with a crayon drawing and said, without flinching, that he was in the place about to make a mistake it couldn't take back. Cole placed both hands on the arms of his wheelchair. He pushed, not to move the chair, to push himself up from it. The clerk saw it first, then the bailiff. Then, one by one, the gallery, until the entire room was watching Judge Raymond Cole, who had not stood on his own 2 feet in 3 years, press himself slowly, with visible effort, with no assistance, to a standing position behind the bench. He stood, not steadily, not without cost. His hands gripped the bench edge and his jaw was set, and it was clearly not easy, and he didn't pretend it was. But he stood. Elijah, still holding his father, turned and saw it. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a boy who had written something down in his heart a long time ago and was now watching it come true, not with the shock of the unexpected, but with the quiet, certain recognition of someone who had believed in a thing long before anyone else thought it was possible. Cole looked at him across the room. And then, in a federal courtroom, in front of reporters and gallery strangers, and a prosecutor who was about to have a very difficult year, Judge Raymond Cole, for the first time in 3 years, took one step forward. Somewhere in the back of the gallery, a phone buzzed once. Nobody looked at it. One step, then another. Judge Raymond Cole crossed the space behind his bench, with his hand braced against the wood. each movement deliberate, each one costing him something the room could see on his face. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared break whatever this was. He reached the edge of the bench and stopped there, breathing hard, gripping the railing, like a man holding onto the only solid thing left in the building. 3 years ago, he said, I was investigating a company that did not want to be investigated. My car went off an overpass. Everyone called it an accident. I called it that too eventually, because believing otherwise meant admitting how powerless I'd let myself become. He looked out at the room. I stopped asking questions after that. I told myself it was quarter 7. It was fear, he said. His eyes found Elijah. A 9-year-old boy walked into my courtroom and refused to sit down. He didn't have evidence anyone would call admissible. He had a drawing and the truth, and the kind of courage I had buried a long time ago. He paused. He didn't make me walk. He made me stand up to something. The rest just followed. Marcus kept one arm around his son, his other hand pressed to his own mouth, unable to speak. Cole looked at Harlan Voss, still seated, still flanked by an attorney who had stopped writing notes. You will answer for what happened in that warehouse, for the men who didn't come home, for every person convicted to protect your name. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That includes what happened to me on that overpass. We will find that too. Federal agents were already moving toward the prosecution side of the room. Detective Raines would be formally charged within the week. Gerald Pitts would resign before the inquiry even opened, though resignation would not be enough to stop what came next. None of that mattered yet. Not in this room, not in this moment. Cole lowered himself back into his chair, slowly, the effort of standing finally catching up with him. But something in his face had changed permanently, and everyone in that courtroom could see it. He looked at Marcus. Mr. Carter, I am sorry this court failed you. I am sorry it took a child's courage to do what the system should have done on its own. Marcus nodded, unable to find words that matched the moment. Cole's gaze moved to Elijah one last time. Thank you, he said simply. Elijah just nodded, the folded drawing still pressed in his small hand, the one he'd carried for 2 days, like it was the only thing standing between his father and a cell. Outside the courthouse that afternoon, the air felt different to Marcus Carter than it had in months, not because anything around him had changed, but because for the first time in a long while, he was breathing it as a free man. Elijah walked beside him, holding his hand the way he used to before everything happened, before warehouses and fires and men in dark suits who told children to forget what they saw. Marcus stopped on the courthouse steps and crouched down to his son's level. How did you know? He asked. How did you know it would work? Elijah looked at him with the simple certainty only a child carries without effort. You always told me truth doesn't disappear. It just waits for someone brave enough to find it. He shrugged. I just didn't want to wait anymore. Marcus pulled him into his arms. Behind them, the courthouse doors remained open, reporters gathering on the steps, a story beginning to spread that would eventually reach far beyond that small courtroom. A story about a corrupt system, a buried conspiracy, and a judge who found his footing again because a child refused to stay silent. But for Marcus and Elijah, none of that mattered yet. What mattered was this: a father free, a son vindicated, and the quiet, unshakable truth that sometimes the bravest voice in the room belongs to the smallest person in it. Some battles are won with evidence. Others are won the moment someone decides to stand, even when everyone around them is still sitting down. If Elijah's courage touched you today, subscribe, because the next story about standing up when no one else will might be the one you need most.